Hey everybody, Riot Mort here with the patch 11.15 patch rundown. We are here, we've made it, we're at the Dawn of Heroes, the mid-set expansion for TFT Reckoning. Before we get started, this video is for people who haven't really played a ton of PBE. If you've played a ton of PBE, this is going to be a refresher. You're probably going to know a lot of this. You can just check out the PBE patch notes. But this is going to be a rundown for people who have been playing live 11.14 and are like, okay, what's new? So, let's dive into it. It's just going to be me today. Try to keep this relatively brief because there's a lot to go over. So not going to go over it in like tons and tons of detail. So let's jump into it. First off, there are 13 champions leaving, as well as 4 traits: Verdant, Coven, Dragon Slayer, and God King, as technically Eternal as well with Kindred. But yeah, so these champions are leaving. They'll no longer be there. Definitely changes the meta a bit. Personally, I'm going to miss Warwick and Katarina. I was kind of a forgotten player. Mordekaiser is another fun one I think is going to be, it's a shame to see go. But hopefully some of the new champions can mix it up. So if you really enjoyed these champions, sorry, time for them to go. There are some changes to familiar faces as well. One big thing to note is there is one less 3 cost now. This will make getting 2-star 3 costs a little bit easier, possibly even 3-starring those 3 costs. So definitely keep note of that. Sejuani has gained the Brawler tag. This should make her a bit more flexible. Diana, Ashe, and Kayle are still around, but they have lost Dragon Slayer and Verdant. And then Garen is no longer a God King, but he is victorious. He is the victorious God King. And the way it works is anytime he gets a kill, his next auto attack is empowered to do 40% of the target's missing health as bonus damage. So he can do a lot more damage than he used to do before. As far as what's coming in, there's a new trait, Cannoneer. The way this works is every 5th attack, the attack is replaced with a cannon that does their attack damage in AoE. So it's really good against clustered enemies. Also really good with high base AD, so you want things like Deathblade, Infinity Edge. It can crit. Doesn't work with Hurricane, but can crit here. Tristana and Lucian are the star carries of this. Tristana can do a lot of damage. She's really powerful for a 2 cost. And Lucian also does a lot of damage with his ult. His ultimate can proc this. It's pretty good. Misfortune is more of a forgotten AP carry. You're not really going to use her and highlight her as a Cannoneer, but she can help provide some utility with the anti-heal Grievous Wound debuff. And then Senna is just a good pairing with Lucian as they're both Sentinels. Easy access to the Sentinel trait, as well as some 1-cost utility that maybe you replace in the later game. And if somehow you're able to get 2 Cannoneer spatulas, you can get 6-piece Cannoneer, which hits like a truck and frankly is basically a win condition. It's one of those crazy ones like 6 Dragon Slayer. As far as the other big trait coming in, we have Sentinel. Sentinel has 8 new units, including Senna, Olaf, Aurelia. Olaf is like Aatrox, kind of frontline, can do some damage, heals up. Not a full tank kind of thing. Aurelia is much more tank-based, but the way she works is if she can get more auto attacks, she becomes even more tanky. So giving her something like a Ginsu's can work really well. Pyke is a reprint, does his AoE stun, pretty cool there. Rakan can do some big AoE heals as well as some damage, so it can keep your Sentinels alive. Galio is a big AoE tank. Give him some tank items and he'll tank and then heal back up. Pretty powerful. We already talked about Lucian. And then the new champion, Akshan. Akshan is a 5-cost. Really wants AD items, Bloodthirster, Deathblade, things like that. Spins around the map with his ability, doing a ton of damage. As for the trait, 3-piece is pretty easy to splash in. Gives your team a shield that bounces around, giving some attack speed. And the thing to note is the shield can jump to non-Sentinels. This is not exclusive to Sentinel. The 6-piece is a much larger shield and gives even more attack speed. And the other thing to note is this attack speed is permanent. So you'll definitely want to get this, have that bounce around, jump to the back line, things like that. And if you can somehow get 9, very large shields, instantly maxing your attack speed at 5.0 cap. So pretty fun there. There's 2 other new champions to talk about. Fiddlesticks has amazing tags: Abomination, Revenant, Mystic. Really well. Also a very powerful ult. You definitely want at least 2 Revenant with him, kind of like Volibear, where he can cast his ult, and then while he's doing the Revenant revive, that ult keeps going. So pretty powerful there. Also gives you access to Mystic. And then Gwen, possibly one of the most flexible 5 costs we've ever made. Just a Mystic, no big deal, add her into Mystic. But Inanimate, as you can see here, puts a patch of mist on the ground, and anyone on your team who stays in that mist for the first 8 seconds takes 33% less damage. So you can put her right behind the front line and give the front line protection, or you can put her right next to your back line, give them protection. Pretty cool positioning puzzle there. And also can be a decent carry herself. Give her something like a Gunblade, maybe some tank items. Blue buff works pretty well. She only has 20 mana. She has a 2 attack range. And she can snip through high health targets very quickly. Given the right items, Gwen can solo an Abomination 5 by herself. So give her a try. Hopefully try out these new champions and see how they affect the meta. Yeah, let us know what you think. So mechanic changes. This is where a big part of Dawn of Heroes is coming in. There are quite a few mechanic changes. First big thing, shadow items are gone. There are no more shadow items. Shadow components are gone. Shadow spatulas are gone. Force of Darkness is gone. It's all gone. We're back to our base item system. Because of that, there are only 8 emblems you can craft with the spatula, and we took the chance to change 2 of them. So armor plus spatula used to be Ironclad emblem, is now Cavalier. More chances to make something charge around, opens up Cavalier's flexibility. And then bow plus spatula used to be Legionnaire, is now Hellion, so more chances to make those tiny little Volibears you've always wanted to make. For your first few days, you might make the mistake of, building the wrong spatula. Don't forget, these changed. The biggest change, though, is with shadow items gone, we're now introducing radiant items. Radiant items are a lot simpler than shadow items. The way it works is every game at 3-6, every player is presented with a radiant armory. It shows you 5 radiant items. You can see here they have slightly different names. Not every player is offered the same item, and you only get one all game. There's no other way to get them, but they're much more powerful. Generally, they have a really cool effect on them, can be extra powerful. But the general idea is they work very similar to their core items. So you can expect somebody who wants Locket is going to want Radiant Locket. Somebody who wants Guardian Angel, going to want Radiant Guardian Angel. They just come with extra effects. And these are balanced in a way so that they should all be good options. So definitely make the right choice. So there's some pretty exciting ones. I personally like Radiant Zephyr and Radiant Shroud. Those are really fun. But 36 new items, give them a try. And certainly one of the most fun ones is Radiant Thieves Gloves, which always gives you 2 full Radiant items, at least for now. So give that a try. But yeah, Radiant items, all positive, all power, all fun. Pretty neat. In addition, Radiant Blessings are here. These are kind of like Lucky Lanterns from Festival of Beasts, but a little different. Instead of everyone getting them on the same turn, the way it works is as soon as you drop below 40 HP, you are given your Radiant Blessing. Every player will get the same thing in their Radiant Blessing that game, but every game is very different. Some game you might get 2 Reforgers, or 5 gold, or a single component. Other games you could get as high as 30 gold, or 2 Force of Natures, or 50 gold, or 2 Tome of Traits, which we'll talk about in a second. It can get pretty wild. Some of those are pretty rare, though. If you're interested, you can check out the full table on my Twitter. But yeah, it's a nice thing that kind of gives you one last burst of power to try to come back into the game, and add some variety and replayability to the game as well. Finally, there is a new item called the Tome of Traits. This can come from either the Radiant Blessing or, if you're lucky, from a gold orb on PvE as early as Krugs. But basically the way it works is it appears on your bench, and you drag it to the shop and you sell it. And when you do, it'll show you 4 emblems. 2 of these are what we call tailored emblems, which means if you have at least one of the trait in your last combat, that could be pulled. The other 2 are pure random. Good luck. You can see here the player got Dawnbringer, Nightbringer, Revenant, and Assassin. And you get to pick one. You pick an emblem for your team. So this is how you can still get things like 5 Revenant, or 6 Assassin. Now there's 1 less Assassin. But the other thing to note is every trait now has an emblem. So even traits that didn't in the first half of Reckoning, like Draconic, Ranger, those now have emblems. So you can pick that, create some new combinations. There's even some new chase traits we'll talk about later. But yeah, give that a try. All right, on to the system changes. There's a lot of text here. I won't go over it too much, but the big thing to note here for a lot of you is that small orbs are now always exactly 3 gold of value, whether that be champions, gold, what you name it. There are no more 4 gold starts. So No more streamers complaining about their 4 gold starts. Those are gone. In order to make that happen, we had to slightly lower the average value of medium orbs. You really won't notice it. There's one new drop where you can get a 3 cost and a 2 cost instead of 2 3 costs. So just a small thing there. Gold orbs, as I mentioned, can now drop Tome of Emblems or Tome of Traits. But in order to do that, Spatulas and Nikos are slightly more rare from gold orbs. And then the other thing to note now is, now that the item system is pretty straightforward, at the end of Raptors, if you've gotten everything, you should have exactly 10 components plus 1 Radiant item. So the minimum is back to sort of 6 full items. You can get more sometimes if you're lucky, obviously at the cost of other things. But yeah, that is sort of the new minimum that you can expect. So, speaking of armories, as I mentioned, 2-2 is now always 2 standard components. There is no 3-2 armory. That's the 3-6 armory that has the 5 Radiant items. 4-2 is back to 100%. And the way the 4-2 one works is it's either 2 components, 3 components, or 3 components plus a special item. Special item is defined as Spatula, Nico's Help, or Loaded Dice. So take that. One thing to note, if you take the Nico's Help or the Loaded Dice, that means you opted out of an item component. That means you'll end up with 11 at the end. So that is a choice you have to make, but just something to note there. So then the 5-2 armory is now slightly less likely. It's exactly 50% actually, and will never contain components. So we're back to 5-1. You can slam all your components, done getting components, unless you're playing Draconic or something. And then 6-2 and 7-2 armories, unchanged, just like live. One other change, Stage 5 and Stage 6 carousels can now contain these uncraftable emblems, or elusive emblems as we call them. This is things like the Draconic emblem, or now Nightbringer, things like that. And then the other thing is that the Stage 6 carousel used to always be half full, half components. Now sometimes it'll be all full items. So more opportunities to have a bigger variety at that late game carousel. So, cool. For Hyper Roll is sticking around. So for those of you that enjoy Hyper Roll, definitely keep playing that. Try to get up to your Hyper tier. There are a couple changes. We added 5 seconds to the planning timers in 3-1, 5-2, 6-2, and 6-3. This is usually related to armories. We've also increased passive gold income at the late game. So now you get 8 gold in Stage 7 on instead of 6, and 9 gold in Stages 8 onward up from 6. This allows you more chances to sort of add skill expression at the end of the game, pivot into some stronger late game comps, and not necessarily have to play the strong board early, roll all your gold down, and not have room to pivot to those 5 costs. So hopefully this should add more variety to the late game parts of Hyper Roll. As for the armories in Hyper Roll, 4-1 armory is likely but not guaranteed, and either offers 3 components or 3 components plus a special item. 5-2 armory is now the 5 Radiant items. 6-3 is likely if there's no armory on 4-1 and has the same structure as 4-1. And the other armories are unchanged. So there you go. Should be good for the Hyper Roll players out there. All right, on to balance changes. Now, there are a lot of changes here, and I'll try to go over all of them, but the general idea should be things that you're familiar with should be a little different, but generally the same idea for the most part. So let's go over it. Abomination is one of the ones that changed. In the first half of Reckoning, Abomination kind of ended up as this weird, like, super DPS assassin, where you would build something like Deathcap, Hurricane, and Infinity Edge, and he would charge in and do, 500 damage per auto, hitting 2 people. Pretty insane, and kind of not what we had originally envisioned for a monstrosity. So we're shifting the Abomination to be much tankier and much less damage. But the other thing we're doing is that Monstrosity and Abomination had this problem where if you got it early, it was great, and then it would fall off a cliff. And so by the end of the game, Abomination 3 was basically not a real trait. Abomination 4 fell off a cliff. So, what does this all mean? Basically what we've done is that if you have Abomination, it'll have a base amount of stats, and then as the game goes on, it'll start to scale those stats. So Abomination 3 at Stage 3 will gain an extra 20% HP and AD, and then at Stage 4 another 20%, and then at Stage 5 another 20%. And you can see here that changes for each one, but basically this is our way of scaling up the trait so it's not as powerful early, but still playable in the late game. The other thing is it requires 1 less ally death, so you don't have to throw all your Abomination units up front to die early to get it to come out. It will come out sooner. It also does some slight amount of magic damage in the area where it stops charging. So now you could give it Morello if you wanted, for example. We buffed its lifesteal, but that lifesteal no longer scales off AP. So Death Cap Scion isn't going to attack or steal health, or excuse me, it's not going to steal health at a crazy ratio there. The ability does last longer, so that's a slight buff for him to get some of that health back. His armor and MR went down at 4 and 5. Health, like I said, went down, but now scales up. AD, as you can see, went way down, so much less multiplicative with things like IE. This should be incentive to maybe even build items like Deathblade, if you want to go that route. Or again, I still think tanky Abomination is going to be the way to play it. And then the scalars also go down to match it. So basically, TLDR of all this is Abomination is tankier, comes out easier, but does less damage, and scales into the late game. So hopefully that plays out well. Certainly on PBE, it's been very strong, but there was one last nerf at the last minute, so we'll have to see how it plays out, and if it stays as strong as we think it's going to be. Assassin. Key thing to note here is there is one less assassin. There are only 5 assassins. If you want 6 assassin, you are going to need a spatula. So to that end, assassin gets buffed critical strike chance. So even 2 assassin is better now. 4 assassin gets an extra 10%. And 6 assassin means you have 100% critical strike range. Because that plus 75 with your 25 base, 100%. So pretty cool. But in order to counteract that, you can see the crit damage has gone down at 4 and 6 just a little bit. Again, still very powerful to have 100% crit rate. If you're running IE, that crit chance is being converted into even more crit damage. So these guys still clap pretty hard. Certainly on PBE, Assassin Emblem was the strongest item in the game, even stronger than every Radiant item. So I'm not too worried about Assassins, but they are a little less powerful than they were on PBE. Brawler 6 has been added and is 1600 HP. If you can get all 5 Brawlers and a Brawler Emblem, 6 Brawler is a lot of health to chew through. So Brawler Garen is really good, because again, if you think about it, Brawler Emblem is 1600 health. That's more than a Warmog's. That is a very powerful item if you want to run that comp. Dawnbringer, let's talk about this very briefly. One of the things you're going to notice in 5.5 is that verticals are still there, but they're not quite as strong as they were before. We still want them to be playable, but what you're often going to see is running something like 6 Dawnbringer, 6 Nightbringer, 6 Forgotten is going to be really good up until like stage 7 or stage 8. And then you're probably going to want to pivot out of it to try to go down to like 4 Dawnbringer with some stronger champions, maybe get rid of that Gragas and that Kha'Zix for something like a Volibear and an Ivern. To that end, Dawnbringer has gone down in healing, and the damage has gone down, because again, we're trying to incentivize people to play a little less verticals in the end game specifically. I still expect 6 Dawnbringer to be very powerful in stage 4, so give that a try. Draconic, this is a big one. Draconic got an extra unit. We mentioned this. Galio is a Sentinel Draconic Knight. This means you can get 5 Draconic as early as like 2-3 if you're insanely lucky. 2-5, 2-6, pretty common if you get pretty lucky. Draconic 5 is now a much more fun trait to play. It's much more accessible. Certainly on PB, everyone was chasing it all the time. It sort of became the new fortune, if you will. But to that end, obviously, we had to balance it. And you'll see there are a lot of Draconic nerfs to go out. First one here is that the value of a 3 Draconic Egg went down slightly. But the value of a 5 Draconic Egg went down pretty substantially, from 9.25 to 7 gold on average. Now, one of the things to note here is we did not change the jackpot eggs. The jackpot eggs are still just as good as they were before. It's more the average case. One other quality of life change for Draconic. If you right-click the egg, you can see their max HP will be equal to the number of turns they are. It won't count down, but at least you can now go, oh, that's a 4-turn egg. Oh, that's a 3-turn egg. And you'll be able to like match it up to the table if you want. And the thing to remember is 4-turn is really, really good if you can get it. 5-turn gold egg is the jackpot. If you can get a 5-turn gold egg, be excited. That's the jackpot. All right, Forgotten. With Forgotten and Shadow items being gone, it had to be reworked. There are less Forgotten champions, and there's no Shadow items to dress it up. So the way it works now is every combat they're a part of, they get even more AD and AP stacking up to 5 times. So for example, if you're running 2 Forgotten with a Vayne, starts out at 20 AD and AP, and then every combat you win is an additional 10% up to 50, so you can get up to 30 AD and AP. For those of you that have been playing since Fates, this looks a lot like Warlord. Because it is. It's very similar to Warlord. Other thing to note here is there are 6 Forgotten units. So to get 8 Forgotten, you are going to need 2 uncraftable emblems. If you do, it is massive. 200 AD and AP on all 8 champions. This is another one of those wacky win conditions. Enjoy your YouTube video if you get it. It's a doozy. Hellion. Hellion got 1 new unit. So there's an extra new unit in the sense of Tristana. So there are now 7 Hellions, I believe. But they've also become more flexible. It is now a 2-4-6-8, meaning early game you could run something like a Poppy and a Ziggs, not have to worry about running the Kled, and run something like a 2-Knight, 2 Spellweaver, or something like that, and still get 2 Hellion. Really opens up some new interesting combos. Because of that, it's been rebalanced. 530, 175, 150. You still need a emblem, but now it's a craftable one to hit 8. Still pretty powerful. Still need that Teemo. But yeah, Hellions are back in a big way. I think you'll be seeing a lot of those little guys. Ironclad was just a little too hard countery for our taste. And the power of getting each Ironclad was pretty dramatic. 170 armor on your entire team shuts down a lot of comps unless you have a Last Whisper. Again, kind of very binary countery. We do like that you can tech in Ironclad to help against that Jax or that Draven or that Aphelios, but not quite in the hard counter way. So we're pulling down Ironclad just a bit, especially at 4 Ironclad, though it really just shouldn't hard counter you. So you can see here the numbers. Again, I still think you're going to see a lot of Ironclad, a lot of Mystic, but not quite as hard countery. Legionnaire, similar thing. There are 7 Legionnaires. You need the Spatula and Kale to hit 8. In order to do that, you need that uncraftable emblem. The reward gets to be worth it, so we buffed up 8 Legionnaire. If you hit it, gotta go fast. Mystic. We've added Mystic 5 because there are 4 Mystics plus the emblem. So you can get all the way up to Mystic 5. Just like Ironclad, though, a little too hard countery for our taste. It does get to be better than Ironclad because it's less general. Ironclad is good against everyone. Everyone auto-attacks. Not everyone has spells. Not everyone has magic damage. So numbers are slightly higher. But you can see here Mystic 3, Mystic 4 went down a little bit. And Mystic 5 is a lot of magic resist. All right, Nightbringer. Nightbringer is another comp on the evil side that lost a few units. Lost Morgana, lost Darius. So definitely a little harder to play as there are only 6 of them. But there are some still really good Nightbringer comps if you're willing to give them a try. So 6 Nightbringer gets a very slight buff here. And just like Forgotten, though, in order to get 8 Nightbringer, you're going to need 2 of those emblems. And so in order to get that, if you do, it's a really big auto-win condition, basically. You can see that shield jumps up to 250%. Pretty nutty. 80% bonus damage. I don't expect 8 Nightbringer to lose, but again, it's one of those really insane chase traits that requires 2 Tome of Traits or really good pickups off the carousel in the late game, so pretty cool. Ranger 6 has been added. There are 5 Rangers. You get the emblem. 6 Ranger. Should be good. It's a lot of attack speed. I'll be honest, hasn't been that successful from what I've seen on PvE, but maybe you can figure out a version that no one else has figured out. The trick here is that you've already got 5 backliners. Do you really need a 6th? And giving your Rel 400% attack speed, not that great. But it's there if you need it. Give it a try. Redeemed. Another one of these verticals that we're kind of adjusting here. Redeemed had this problem where it gave you so much armor in MR, especially at 6, that again, we talked about that hard counter situation. It really came down to, do you have Last Whisper? If yes, you probably win. If no, you probably don't. Don't really like that as much. So what we did is we actually pulled out a lot of the defenses. You can see here the armor and MR went down to 20, 35. That's a lot lower. Instead, we gave it back in some of the AP. And then also the individual units got some of the HP back as well to keep them still being a little more effective health, but also more flexible into other traits as well. So Redeemed should still be playable, should still be okay. Again, though, like the other verticals, I expect it to be good in stage 7, maybe early stage 8 or level 8. And then you transition out, go down to 3 Redeemed, play some better units, stuff like that. Renewer. Renewer lost Lysandra, but gained Rakan, so actually ends up a little bit better. I think Renewer is one of the comps that people are sleeping on. I think there are a lot of good Renewer builds using Vladimir to start off with, some Rakan, and then obviously late game Heimerdinger. That being said, Renewer got a buff, regens a little bit more, so definitely be on the lookout for Renewer. Revenant gained a unit, gained Fiddlesticks. So now it is a 2, 3, 4, 5. Each step basically lets them revive with slightly more health. We also lowered the damage dealt and damage taken aspect of this. This went from 30% to 25%. I don't think anyone really wants a Fiddlesticks doing 30% extra damage as soon as it reses while it's ult going on, so we'd lowered that slightly. But yeah, if you can get up to 5 Revenant, they'll come back with 70% health, which is a lot of effective health to chew through. Alright, Skirmisher is a weird one. Let's talk about Skirmisher. Skirmisher lost a 3 cost and a 2 cost, but gained a 2 cost and a 1 cost. So there are still 8 Skirmishers. It is very easy to get early 3 Skirmisher going. It is very easy to get early 6 Skirmisher going at level 6. It's a very powerful comp at level 6. I expect a lot of people to run this. It'll get you through level 6, maybe even level 7. It'll do very well. Because of that, we had to nerf it because it was very accessible early. That being said, if you can get up to 9, it's very powerful. You have to be level 9. It's hard to get to. And you can see it got massively buffed as one of those chase traits. My expectation is that you're not going to see a lot of 6 Skirmishers win lobbies. You're going to see people play 6 Skirmisher to reach the late game, transition out of it, and then win with something like 3 Skirms or even 0 Skirms, but like a Jax carry. That's sort of the expectation here. And again, that's intentional. We want these verticals to be something you play in the mid game, then move on. Spellweaver, I'm not going to lie. I am looking for someone to surprise me and come up with a really cool Spellweaver build that I haven't thought of. This is a hard comp. No changes right now. Spellweaver is Spellweaver. The only big thing to note is that if you can get 6 Spellweaver, it is a ton of ability power, 200% once it's fully stacked. It's pretty crazy. I'm not going to lie, though. I think this is probably one of the traits that's... We'll see. Like I said, really hope somebody proves me wrong. But, yeah, Spellweaver. All right, on to champions. So Aatrox, like I talked about, giving some of that redeemed stats back to the champions so that it could be played in other comps. Aatrox gets that through 5 more armor and MR. He's supposed to be an early game sort of frontliner. Never really had that frontline armor and MR base stats, so he got that. Leona is a sign of one of the things that you're going to see across the board here, and what I'm calling super tanks. There were a few too many super tanks that were going infinite with the right items, things like Redemption, Bramble, Dragonclaw, and then you just stay alive forever. That's not what tanks are supposed to do in TFT. Tanks are supposed to be tanky for a bit, buy your team some time, and then die. That is the intention of tanks. And so you're going to see a lot of changes to try to take these super tanks into that situation where they don't go infinite. They can buy you even more time by being extra tanky, but not go infinite. And so in Leona's case, she has more mana, so she doesn't get to cast quite as often. And her spell, which was already reducing damage post-mitigation, so this is after things like Mystic, Redeemed, Ironclad, would then cut it even more, a little less powerful. Leona's still going to be a good tank. She's just not going to be an immortal tank. So, changes there. Hecarim, another example of this, that super tank problem. Hecarim now doesn't get to cast as often, and when he does, the healing has been nerfed at 3-star, so he doesn't get to just sit there and go infinite forever. Hecarim will still be very tanky. Seen a lot of people still have success with this guy, which just shows you how powerful he is. But again, less casts, less insanity. Compensated with some damage at 3-star, so it's still worth 3-starring him. Of course, the health, who doesn't want that? But Hecarim shouldn't quite be the infinite sustain tank as before. Sejuani, now that she's a brawler, has ended up being one of the more flexible champions in the game. We've seen people be able to throw 2 to 3 tank items on Sejuani and fast 8 off that, so a little too tanky for our liking, pulling some of that spell bonus armor and MR out of her spell. Syndra and Varus both gain the HP from that redeemed change like I talked about. Syndra also, hopefully this fixes all those issues where Syndra would throw somebody and everyone would chase after them. The grabbed units are now untargetable, so that should hopefully help. But Syndra was doing a little bit too much damage for like a stage 2, stage 3 kind of champion, so we pulled that down just a little bit. Ashe, as we talked about, Draconic, more accessible, doesn't get to be as powerful. You're going to 3-star this more often, especially if you hit Draconic 5. Can't be as powerful. So Ashe loses some AD, casts a little less often, and that 3-star Ashe arrow is not going to hit nearly as hard. Lulu has been a champion that's underperformed for a little bit, so we're giving her some attack speed, open up some options like a Shojin build where she can cast a little bit more. So just a small buff to Lulu there. Nunu, secretly probably very OP for a while, played an A-bomb and just deletes tanks with his ability. A lot of people running things like Warmogs, Radiant Warmogs Nunu, and that first cast will delete a tank. That's a lot of power. And we're okay with that. Nunu gets to eat things. That's his job. But he doesn't get to eat things repeatedly, and so we're slowing down the mana here so he doesn't get to quite cast as often for free. Zyra, same thing as Ashe, but even more extreme here. We saw a lot of Zyra A-bomb builds with Draconic kick off at the end of Reckoning. But now that Draconic is even more accessible and A-bomb is even tankier, Zyra really can't be that powerhouse that she was at the end of Reckoning. So Zyra 2 and 3 spell damage goes down, and the stun goes down a half-second duration at each level, because a spell that's chunking you for 800 probably doesn't also need to stun you for 3 seconds. So Zyra gets a bit of a nerf as well. On to 4 costs. This is where there's some pretty big changes. Aphelios was in an awkward state in Reckoning. He was very powerful if you could get the comp with him online, but kind of had this weird identity of just like an awkward, very high DPS target with 4 Ranger, whose spell just kind of hit occasionally. We're leaning into that identity a little bit more. We want Aphelios to be the big AD spellcaster. So you can see here his AD goes down, so his auto attacks are not going to hit as hard. The mana goes up a lot, so it takes a lot longer for him to cast. But when he casts, it hits hard. He's got a big spell AD ratio, big base damage, and now even hits an extra target. This guy hurts. This is slightly nerfed from PBE, where people were playing him and saying he was S tier. But give this guy a Deathblade, an IE. People have been running Ginsus and Bloodthirster to get him to cast more often. There's even Shojin option. Shojin is good because it does give that AD, which, as you see, the spell AD ratio scales that up pretty well. This guy hits really hard, and because he can skip past the front line and hit other targets, can be a really good AD carry. Tack that all off with Nightbringer multiplicativeness, and yeah, this guy can get nuts. Diana. Whew. Diana's an interesting one because a lot of people were saying Diana is going to be terrible, and maybe she was day 1 of PBE, but losing the Dragon Slayer trait got her a lot of power back. She gained 100 HP. She gained 20 AD, which is great for an assassin who's auto-attacking. She gained attack speed, so she can attack quicker to get that spell cast off quicker. She gained mana. She casts that spell even quicker, and that spell hits harder, an extra 100 damage at 2-star. Do not sleep on Diana. Her utility was already good. Now she's actually got some damage behind it. Give her something like a Radiant Frozen Heart. Your enemies are going to hate it. Diana is a good champion, I promise you. Jax. Jax is, again, with Skirmisher, we want Jax to be the endgame state for Skirmisher. Your goal is to run 6 Skirmisher, find that Jax, and then slowly pivot into a late game comp around that Jax using something like RFC, Hurricane, Last Whisper, Bloodthirster, you name it. In order to do that, Jax needs a slight buff. I admit I'm a little skeptical on this buff, especially after the Reckoning finale where Jax is already doing great. But he's got 1,000 health. He is going to be hard to take down. Once he gets ramped up, he's going to be a monster. Karma's a little more powerful than we're comfortable with. Doing very well with some of the Radiant items. Dawnbringer, even after the nerf, still doing good. So Karma gets a slight nerf at 1 and 2-star. Again, we still want her to be a strong carry, especially in like a late game 4 Invoker comp, maybe like 4 Dawnbringer, 4 Invoker. No difference there. Finally, Vel'Koz, side effect of that redeemed change, gets some extra HP to stay alive a little longer. All right, 5 costs. Garen. Garen is another one of those super tanks that got some big changes here. So you can see, does not get to cast nearly as often. The problem with Garen was the window to kill him was very small with that 100 mana. So this goes all the way up to 180. This is a pretty big nerf here. But in exchange, the spell hits harder. So you can actually run something like an IE Jeweled Gauntlet Garen and have it hit like a truck. The spell gives a bigger shield, and that shield lasts a little longer. So you're definitely probably going to get one really big Garen cast, and maybe with some good itemization, you can get that second one, but it's going to be pretty unlikely to get the third. And again, that's what we're looking for, is a tank that will eventually die. And frankly, Garen 2 in Reckoning Didn't die. Heimerdinger. Heimerdinger is more accessible with Draconic. We're going to see him a lot more in Endgame. Got a lot of power for things like Renewer. That power had to come back somewhere. We're taking just a little bit of power out of that spell. So the spell's not quite as strong. Kale, same thing. Kale's looking pretty decent if you can get the comp. Admittedly, Kale is still very narrow. But when you can get it, very powerful. We do have to keep that in check. So very slight nerf to her Ascension 1 true damage. And then finally, Teemo. Teemo, this is a pretty meaningful buff. Teemo is the kind of champion that has a lot of utility. His spell slows their attack speed by 50%. The problem was with no items, it was hard to splash him in. 66 auto attacks is a long time into the fight. So he gains 30 starting mana to make sure that that first cast can come out quick, and you can get that utility even if you don't itemize him. And frankly, if you do itemize him, it's very easy to have him instant cast at the start of the fight. I think Teemo is the best user of Radiant Blue buff. But yeah, so start considering Teemo even if you're not running Hellions and Invokers. On to items. Chalice of Power, slight buff. Frankly, no one was really excited to build a Chalice of Power, so we're bringing that back up. There might be some more work to do here, but we don't really like unbuildable items. Chalice was kind of fitting that. Gets a buff. Dragonclaw. Dragonclaw has got a rework to hopefully be a little bit better item that you're willing to play in the early game. It still grants 200 MR, which is a little less, but every time you're hit by a magic or true damage ability, you launch a fireball at the person that deals 30% of their max HP. It has a 1 second cooldown, so it can only fire once every second at one target, but it can actually dish out a decent amount of damage from a tanky target, so consider an early Dragon's Claw if you're stuck with those cloaks. Hand of Justice. This is probably one of the biggest reworks in terms of power. Hand of Justice is back to being a very slammable item. It used to be either 35 AD and AP or 35 Omnivamp. Now what it is you get 10 AD and AP and 10 Omnivamp, and one of those is increased to 35%. So that means you always get some amount of Omnivamp, which makes it, if you need the item with healing, Hand of Justice is a very slammable way to go. Infinity Edge now gets 10% critical strike damage. It's a slight buff. After the crit change, it ended up being a little weaker than we were comfortable with, so it gets a very slight buff. Titan's Resolve. Titan's Resolve gets a pretty decent change here. It used to be that you had to either be hit or critical strike, which meant it was very tied to items like Infinity Edge or had to be played on like a bruiser or a tank. Now you get the stacks on auto attack. This means you can play it on a backliner and get that full benefit of AD and AP. Because of that, it's easier to stack. We had to pull down the power. But now if you're a champion that scales really well with AD and AP and needs a little defense, like say a Vayne, this item can actually be an option you can consider. Trap Claw. Trap Claw is an interesting one because if you remember, Shadow Trap Claw was called Banshee's Claw. Well, we liked that item so much that it is now the main Trap Claw. Trap Claw now, when combat begins, will give you a spell shield and your neighbors a spell shield, and that spell shield will block one spell. The other neat trick here is it's no longer unique. You can actually stack spell shields. If you want to run a triple Banshee's Claw champion to prevent 3 spells, you can do that. So it should be a much more interesting item than the old Trap Claw. Finally, Zeke's, just like Chalice, was an item that felt like no one was building. We're bringing that back up just a little bit. Finally, bug fixes. Teemo, oh, this one's a long time coming. Teemo's Doppelhellion can now trigger Cruel's passive. So this means if you have a Teemo and it dies, and the other Teemo comes out, and that other Teemo is the last one standing in a 1v1, that Teemo will finally trigger Cruel and destroy them. So good times there. We fixed the issue. Sejuani's ability will now properly deal damage to units who are immune to CC. Just an issue we missed there. The assassin one. If you remember about a month and a half ago, we had that bug fix, or that change that made assassins always jump first. And this allowed for better counterplay, because you could actually corner and make sure that the assassins couldn't get to you. Something went wrong in the code at one patch, and unfortunately it got reverted. Well, we figured out what went wrong, got it fixed, and now we can make sure that that works properly. It should be back to working. Looks good on PB so far, so good stuff. We've hopefully fixed the issue where Titan's Resolve would just randomly stop stacking. If you see this, send us a video, let us know, but should be fixed. And finally, Gragas' ability no longer goes through Banshee's Claw, the spell shield. All right, that is it. That was a very fast rundown of patch 11.15 with the mid-set expansion. There's a lot going on. Hopefully everybody enjoys it. Should be a lot of fun here. And yeah. All right, that's going to do it for me. 40-minute video. Holy crap. Tried to go fast. So hopefully you enjoy it. Enjoy the patch. Let us know what you think. Good luck on your climb. And we'll see you next time. Take it easy.